Greetings from Byron Bay, Australia. My name's Monique Lewis. I'm presenting today on constructions of risk in news reports about herbal medicine. It's a content analysis of mainstream in Australian newspapers based on my PhD, or a component of my PhD research at Southern Cross University. I'm now working as a research fellow at Griffith University. The inspirations for my research include the very interesting historical backdrop for herbal medicine, in which herbal medicine as a therapy and a practice is very much marginalised in the broader context of biomedical hegemony. There's a strong stigma of quackery throughout the last century, and it does continue indeed into this century. Here's a great 19th century image of the quack quacking his wares. Conventional hospital physicians themselves were not exempt from these negative portrayals. Additionally, herbal medicine has come from being quite a raw cottage industry based on lay knowledge and traditional knowledge to an increasingly globalised, commercialised industry increasingly based on scientific knowledge through research. But it's also become part of the pharma brandscape. There is a process of pharmaceuticalisation at work. Another area I was very keen to explore in particular were the conflicting and the competing truth claims in the mainstream and biomedical media. I'm just going to be talking about the mainstream media representations today. My key research questions were, what are the dominant topics and frames about herbal medicine in these stories? Is there an emphasis on risk? And what were the key sources that journalists used in their reports? So why did I look at news? Well, firstly, it's a genre that we tend to take seriously. News reports also impact on how we accept or adapt our health knowledge and our health behaviours. Research has shown that even the sceptical are influenced, and it also has an impact on public opinion and policy, which of course is why it's a popular source of information for politicians. This diagram highlights the three phases of the research, starting with focus groups and then moving on to my content analysis studies. I just wanted to define framing. This quote by Entman gives a great definition. Looking at framing as what is made most salient, what stands out the most in the text, what are the key messages that come from it? It's not just a matter of how frequently something's referred to, it's actually all about the way everything is said as a whole package. The methods I used for the newspaper analysis, it was content analysis. The units of analysis were manifest codes, so I measured whenever a specific word like toxicity was mentioned, or toxic, or drug interactions, or regulation is needed. At the same time, in addition to the manifest codes, I had latent codes, which were the broader themes and the framings about the herbal medicines. Were they positive or negatively depicted? Were the headlines positive or negative? And what were the main sources of information? Also, I used my own sources for finding these articles were Factiva, NewsBank, and the Fairfax newspaper sites. The methods I used, I had 45 manifest codes under the themes of risk, efficacy, quality, regulation, socio-political. And for my latent analysis, there were 9 themes, there were 19 framings, and then of course I looked at positive, negative, and the sources, which are indeed an underestimated force in news reporting. The results, well, firstly, 139 articles were sourced over the 5-year period. The most frequent individual codes, this is for the manifest analysis, were firstly the general risk of herbal medicine, or the specific risk of, or general specific risk of a herbal medicine practitioner, followed by the reference to adverse events. Efficacy came next, which again coheres with the MJA study that I did. And then following that comes research results, the need for regulation, etc. When those manifest categories were grouped or clustered, I found that when all the categories that were risk-oriented were combined, we had almost 70% frequency of that. We had over 30% frequency of benefits being referred to. Also, socio-cultural and regulation issues followed, and then quality issues. For the latent analysis, so this is when I was looking at the news frames that had the highest frequency. Risk came up as the top
the top frame that was referred to most frequently, followed by corruption and vulnerable consumer. Herbal medicine is effective, followed that, and then negligent practitioner at 15%, which is arguably very risk-oriented anyway, by the very nature of it.
This is the dodgy practitioner frame. This appeared regularly based on 2 court cases occurring during the period under study. This man was a claimed naturopath who actually was unqualified and who treated a patient who ended up dying. Following on from the dodgy practitioner stories, this is an example of that concept being harnessed by a group of herbalists and naturopaths who are advocating registration of naturopaths in Australia. And you can see by the headline they've really honed in on that issue of shonky practitioners, or the dodgy practitioner. This is one of a whole series of articles that arose after the publication of a journal paper by Professor Roger Byard about herbal medicines in toxicology reports in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. And the way it's translated in the media articles is a broad generalisation about herbal medicine dangers, interestingly enough using a very non-herbal image of a toad. In contrast to the risk stories that contain those sweeping statements, are the more specific risk stories that function as government warnings against certain products. This is an example of the Malaysian government banning a herb that has been adulterated with ingredients that are used in making Viagra. So who do journalists actually cite overall? Well, most frequently are police and the courts due to a number of court case stories that occurred. Secondly come universities as a primary source of information in journalist stories about herbal medicine, then government, and then the herbal medicine, complementary medicine practitioner. In the stories about risk, journalists tended to cite sources coming from hospitals, from professional CAM bodies, notably the National Herbalists Association of Australia, who have actually had quite a good run in risk-oriented stories. Government comes next, professional medical bodies, followed by biomedical practitioners, then biomedical journals, universities, then herbal medicine practitioner. There's quite a discrepancy between complementary medicine research sources and biomedical research sources in universities. The complementary medicine research is in the red and the blue depicts biomedical research. We had 11 articles for complementary medicine research. As you can see in the first column, which depicts negative article tone, biomedical research dominates. In the next column, under positive article tone, complementary medicine research dominates. Then in the third, risk of herbal medicine is dominated by biomedical research sources. And then in the fourth, efficacy stories are dominated by complementary medicine research sources. In the next column, which is based on articles that had a negative scientific research frame, they all came from biomedical research sources. And interestingly, the positive scientific research framings were spread quite evenly between the two. So the broad picture here is that risk is a dominant theme. Unethical quacks, with those 2 prominent court cases dominated. And, these are exciting stories looking at conflict, negativity, drama, plus that has the watchdog component. And, of course, risky products themselves, adverse events and drug interactions were popular. Sweeping risk frames tended to be more common. They tend to present consumers as ignorant or vulnerable. There's also an ambiguity associated with it, which that vagueness or ambiguity does help the message to reach a larger audience because it isn't specifically about one population group or demographic. Also, the sweeping risk frame is often controversial, so it suits news values. It could be debunking the popular belief that echinacea works. There might be a story came out saying that it actually didn't, which was debunking popular belief. Now, specific risk frames are quite different because they don't tend to offer that sweeping statement about the dangers of herbs. They are more likely to offer alternative viewpoints from other groups, so sources that counter the risk frame. They tend to represent audiences or can take into account audiences as patient consumers who are actively responsible and information seeking. and they're also self-regulating. The specific risk frame also enables people to avoid particular products. So it's part of that overall government message about the danger. If they have found a danger or contamination in a specific product, then that becomes a useful filter for the government.
So the groups involved in constructing risk. Who constructs the risk? First we have government via the Therapeutic Goods Administration typically. Universities play a role. Hospitals, of course, play a role. They're right at the front line of injury. Herbal medicine practitioners also played a part, but typically they're affiliated with either a university or a professional body, but they are emerging as a new voice of legitimacy. That's an important point. It's very rare we see lay people as playing a role in constructing risk messages, and of course newsmakers, journalists, sub-editors, editors, producers, they all certainly play a role in that process.
Government regulators and policymakers are involved in this risk construction process. They send out media releases about their regulatory activities, about health warnings, reports that have just come out. Journalists then absorb this information into their own meaning-making process of news construction, and then, of course, we consume that. It is important to note, of course, it is a responsibility of government to communicate risks to the public. University status is a very powerful asset for claims makers about herbal medicine. Biomedical researchers are regarded as experts whose discursive strategies are given dominance. It's important to note that risk frames are more prevalent in research that's biomedically driven as opposed to research that's driven by complementary medicine. Herbal medicine researchers are more likely to be cited in articles about efficacy or addressing the need for better regulation than are biomedical researchers.
So I found that in the news stories, biomedical practitioners that aren't affiliated with a university or a hospital are not used as a main source by journalists. Their aura of expertise is well and truly diminished in the herbal medicine field. They're no longer experts, which coheres a bit with risk theory too. Also, private industry, lay people and celebrities rarely used as sources, which actually contradicts findings from other studies in the UK, the US and Canada.
Given the proportion of efficacy framings, it's important to talk about this risk-efficacy interface. Studies in Australia have shown that GPs and hospital practitioners believe that whilst herbal medicines are effective, that they're also potentially harmful. And in fact, they believe that there is a greater rate of harmfulness associated with herbal medicines. So that belief is stronger. There's this idea of as herbal medicine becomes recognised for its potency as a potent substance, it becomes imbued with medical meaning, and which of course carries with it efficacy but also risk. And here's a diagram that reflects that last point about the risk-efficacy correlation. As potency increases, so too does the efficacy, also does the risk, and vice versa. As it decreases, the risk decreases, as does the efficacy.
What we've found is there's a whole series of conflicting voices and claims makers, all trying to get the dominant frame and be the main voice that's heard in the news stories. We see risk as a rhetorical strategy attempting to influence public policy and opinion. Of course, that doesn't mean it's successful in actually doing so. Risk does have the power to obfuscate more important substantial debates that could be occurring about herbal medicine, such as, is it beneficial for Australian citizens? Can we afford it? Should government policy support its use? So those are all important questions that don't ever seem to get asked.
Future research could look at a broader scope of media genres, including social media, but looking also at television and radio. Also, you can analyse media messages as much as you want, but it's hard to know exactly what's going on in the audience's minds until you actually do some audience reception analysis. So you interview audience members and see what they think. Thanks for listening and for viewing my PowerPoint presentation. Please email me if you have any questions or comments or feedback. It'd be much appreciated. Love to hear from you. Thank you.